Hey y'all, welcome to the Team LocoFit Roundtable, hosted by me, Laurin Conlon, owner of Team LocoFit. Each week, I am joined by one of our coaches to dive headfirst into the nutrition, training, mindset, and coaching strategies we use with our clients. If you loved the show, please subscribe, leave us a review, tell a friend, you know the drill. And for more information about coaching, the programs we offer, and additional content, visit teamlocofit.com. All right, and we are back, and this week I'm joined with Rick, our mental health consultant.
Hi.
You almost jumped me out there. You were so ready. You were so ready before your title.
I did.
Today's topic I'm very excited about. Usually, I always say that, so let's be honest. I'm always excited about our podcast. But this is a topic that comes up a lot in your practice and a lot just with everybody in general. It doesn't matter how old you are, how young you are, what you do for a living, doesn't really matter. A lot of people struggle with decisiveness and being able to decide, not just when they're in a stressful situation, but small things too, right? So all of these daily decisions that we make when we're not effective at it can really, really hamper everything else in our life, whether that's communication or just moving forward with our goals, etc. So we wanted to do a whole podcast on developing decisiveness. And when I brought this up to the team, everybody was like, yes, please, we need to do one on this. So take it away.
Right. So yeah, being decisive is a quality that I think sometimes can be developed within a person. I think innately, inherently, however you grew up, who you are as a person, we can all make decisions. We make them every single day, from the clothes that we wear to the way we drive to work, to the food that we eat, to what our priorities are for that day, what we're going to accomplish. So you make hundreds and hundreds, thousands of decisions daily. I think it's just what it boils down to is some of the other decisions that we struggle with, and what are those decisions and how do they manifest and when do they come up in our lives. And so I think you'll know when it's generally an important decision in your life when it starts to make you feel nervous or anxious about making that decision. When you feel overwhelmed, when you feel stressed, when you feel like you start questioning yourself. Generally speaking, that's a decision that is not going to be made very easily or quickly.
Just a day in the life.
Just a day in the life of Laurin. So when you get to that space, then you know it's an important decision, because clearly, you're a high functioning adult, you can make 1,000 decisions a day, but there's always a handful of decisions that cause us to. And so some typical ones do I move? Do I keep the job? Do I stay? Do I go? Do I whatever? Those are kind of some of the bigger decisions that people are going to make throughout their life. And so it's a really typical decision, or a really typical situation, to find yourself confused and not know what to do and to hesitate.
And this happens even with small things too. And that, I think, is something that we can really focus on. And I think, at least for me, somebody who can struggle sometimes with decisiveness, oftentimes you feel like, oh my gosh, I have to make this huge decision right now. And it's well, what if I made smaller decisions along the way? Mm-hmm. Obviously, there are certain ones that either have to be a yes or a no. That's pretty obvious. But for a lot of situations that we're dealing with, you don't have to make a yes or no black and white decision. You can make, okay, let's break this down into 10 parts and let me move just a little bit here. Because when you are making a decision, you're basically just shooting in the dark and hoping that it goes how you want. So instead of making this huge overhaul, why don't you say, okay, well, why don't I move in this direction at least and see how it goes, and then I can adjust from there. And so small, tiny decisions, I think, can really impact people. And those are the things that sometimes I think we forget about. Oh, this small decision has a really positive or negative impact, as it kind of snowballs.
Mm-hmm. Well, in making those small decisions, it can help you kind of gauge. It's kind of you're just putting one foot in front of the other. You got your toes in the sand, now your foot's in the water, and now you're shin deep, knee deep, thigh deep, and before you eventually totally, submerge yourself. And so making smaller decisions, if it's possible, those kind of micro decisions can definitely help gauge whether or not you feel comfortable, or if this is going in the right direction, or if this doesn't feel right at all, and you can back out of it, and there's not you haven't invested too much time or too much money or too much effort or energy into something. So yeah, if you possess the ability to make smaller decisions around something, do it. For example, before I make the jump to private practice, it was okay, I need to start the practice and have a few ongoing clients. Take that few, let that grow. And then it's okay, well, where am I now? So it's at that space where it's do I do this full time, and do I quit my job? And so I'm even in that same boat where it's okay, but there's micro decisions that were made. So it was like, okay, I didn't just like up in one day say, hey, I'm going to start a business and then quit my job and quit everything that comes along with it.
And unfortunately, I think whether it's like, I don't know if it's like pop culture or if that's the right word or not, but like the theme a lot of people share is like, just follow your heart and like follow your passions and like move across the country and like do this. And it's like every time I see people talk about that, I'm like, oh my gosh, like my heart's breaking for everybody who's listening to this and thinking that that's a good idea. Because obviously if you're moving out of a situation because you're in like, you know, a dead-end job and your, you know, boyfriend's abusing you, like, yeah, maybe you need to move. But like for most people, like just changing your whole life with like one massive decision is probably the worst, like, just advice you could give to somebody. And I think that's what actually stalls people out too from making a decision, right? Because they're like, oh, I don't want to do this because X is going to happen. And then they catastrophize it. The whole deal. Again, day in life.
to piggyback off of what you said, because this is actually something I was going to talk about a little bit later, but we can throw it more into the front. One of the things that I'll try and, when I'm listening to somebody struggle with a decision, one of the first things I try and do is I'll funnel it through, are they using, which mind are they using? And essentially there's three minds, but it's the third mind that we don't use. We have what's called like our reasoning mind, which is like our logic mind. So if I were to ask you, all right, you have $100, what bills are you going to pay first? Are you going to pay this bill or this bill? Well, you'll sit there. It's not an emotion that's going to make that decision. Logically, you're going to be like, well, I need my phone for my business or whatever, so I'm going to pay my phone. Fine. You made that decision using 100% logic and reason. There was no other components involved in that. On the other side of that is our emotional mind. And the emotional mind is made with, or decisions are made with, like how am I going to propose, or where are we going to go for our honeymoon or our vacation, or do I marry this person, etc. Like those are more, do I date this person? Those are more emotional mind. And so what we find is a lot of times there are people who just use those minds and they're like, I'm all reasoning or I'm all emotion, or they can use both, but they use them separately. When the reality is what we want to use is that third mind, which is what's called a wise mind, which takes into account logic and reason and your emotions. So yes, I think it's kind of stupid to pick up your entire life and move halfway across the country if you've done no other thought process with it and you haven't invested in any time or effort into where you're going to move and what the job market looks like and all that kind of stuff. That's being foolish and naive. But there's nothing wrong with saying like, okay, what am I passionate about and what makes sense? Like, is this the right move to make? And what are the pros and the cons and stuff like that? We can get into pros and cons lists, but the idea of it is I'll start asking myself when I'm listening to somebody tell me about a struggle, the first thing I always try and do is, because it helps me understand where it's coming from, where I can say, all right, this is definitely more of an emotional issue for this person. And maybe they're ignoring the reasoning, the logical components of it. Or I might be saying, you know what, they're using too much logic or reason because they're completely ignoring it. I haven't heard anything where they're talking about this emotional component with it. And so I'll try and bring that into it one way or the other, and just to get the person to make the best, most complete decision possible. So yeah, it's kind of using those three minds and just working to always use your reasoning mind and understand that you're a human being, no matter how hard you try not to be. You're saddled with emotions, and it's there, and emotional needs are a very real thing. And so logical and reasoning and those components are also equally important. So combine the two, and then you'll generally be happy with the decision that you make, or happier.
Happier, yeah.
So some of the other stuff that can make decisions difficult. Number one, first and foremost, if you have too many options. Sometimes this is just like, you walk in and you love everything, or you don't know what everything is, and so you want to try everything on the menu or wherever you're at. So it can be really difficult. So if we have too many options, it's just too difficult. And actually, I found this out because I've really started ramping up, working out in the gym a lot more. And I actually found, I was like, all right, how do I prioritize what I actually want to do? Because there's so much to do, and there's so many different ways to work even one body part. It's like, how does somebody do this? And so I started to feel slightly overwhelmed, and that's where I leaned on, like a coach to be like, hey, this is where you're going to go. You just start with these things. Let's do this. Let's build these things, and you can go. Well, it gives you a good direction. But to somebody walking in, too many options can be a bad thing.
Oh, for sure. Especially, in our space, there's so much information. And there's also so much misinformation.
Yeah.
And the problem is not enough people, there's so much information, whether it's good or bad, right or wrong, but a lot of people do not put that information into context. So I could have a conversation with you or somebody down the hall or at the gym, and while the principles might be similar, like whatever your goals are, the context is completely different. So you could be like, hey, I saw this video, like, would that help me? I saw this topic, would that help me? I was just at an event this week, and everybody, oh, what do you do? You know, asking these questions. And of course, when I say what I do, then people ask something that they've seen or that they've been trying, which is understandable. And it's so hard because obviously I want to give somebody something, but I'm like, okay, well, we're gonna have to actually talk about this because I can't just say, is intermittent fasting appropriate for you? Well, what are your goals? What are the people's goals that you were hearing this from, right? So often you have to, like when you're listening to something and somebody's giving you information, what is the context that they're sharing this from? Is it from their own personal perspective? Is it from their clients? Is it the situation that you're in? And if it's not the situation that you're in, that's very different. So for the intermittent fasting example, are you a lifestyle person just looking to improve your health and longevity? Or are you trying to be a professional athlete? Two completely different things.
Absolutely.
Now, can fasting work within both of those communities? Yes, but in very different ways. So I think that there oftentimes too much information is certainly bad, but lack of context, I would say, is even more prevalent in our industry because people just don't like to give that because it's a longer conversation. You know what I mean? Like you have to do it on a podcast. You can't do it on, I mean, you can do it on a post, but literally even on a post, there's going to be like word limits, and then obviously people are going to stop reading. And I mean, there's long form content is really the only way to get that out. And if you're listening to like short bits of information, it's really hard to get the full picture.
Yes, I agree. So what makes a decision difficult? Sometimes too many options. Another thing that can make something difficult is when options are very similar. When you don't know which way to go because they both look or they're packaged very similarly, and the benefits don't necessarily jump out at you, and you're kind of like, well, what's the difference between these? And if I can't tell, well, then how do I choose? Like,
do I need another black t-shirt? No. But do I continue to buy them even though they're remotely the same thing? Yes.
And then option number 3, or what makes
you didn't want me to say that, huh?
I mean, everybody who follows you knows that you were born in black. When a choice involves difficult trade-offs, right? When you're sacrificing one thing to get something else, this becomes like, is what I'm getting worth what I'm giving up, or what am I giving up? Is it better than what I'm getting? It can be very difficult, and people can kind of just find themselves stuck and stay still because they don't know how to make that decision. And sometimes the benefits can be completely different in both areas. Like I've got benefits A, B, and C over here, but over here it gives me X, Y, and Z, and they're both important. So how do I choose? Well, it's a really good decision, like time to start applying some of these other skills and start to look at it from other perspectives. So those are kind of some of the things, like if you've ever found yourself in any of those situations, I think for most people, what compels them to a point of paralysis or the inability to make a decision is the idea or the belief that they're afraid of making the wrong choice, right? And this goes back to, I've talked about this in other podcasts with you. People have a tendency to look at choices as good or bad, right and wrong. And I think sometimes I'm always trying to steer people clear of preconceived concepts of what's right or wrong and what's good or bad, and looking at it more from what is more beneficial for you as a person. Because sometimes what's more beneficial for you as a person, or what's even healthier, flies in the face of convention. It's not typical, it's not going to be for everybody, it's going to be more specific for you. So that's sometimes where some of the struggle comes in, because people are afraid of making a mistake. And they're afraid that by making the mistake, that it somehow makes them a bad person. Or it makes them wrong, and no one wants to be wrong. And so a lot of times being wrong means that you're just not being wrong, but when you're in that situation, you're just really uncertain of the future. And because you can't predict the future, it leaves you struggling to make that choice, because this choice is about where your life is going to go. If it's a big choice, to move, to get the job, to stay in the relationship, to start the new career, to go back to school, whatever it is.
And as many micro decisions as you want to make, which is helpful up to a point, like at some point are you going to go back to school or not? Like, that's it.
Right.
That ends up being a yes or a no. Like, obviously you can start taking steps. Like, maybe you start with a class, then you decide, do I even like this anymore? Or was this just like a fantasy in my head that I wanted to be back in school?
Right.
But at some point you have to say, okay, I'm going to get the degree or not. And so I would say that the micro decisions are probably going to be helpful in that situation, but up into a point. So for anybody listening, like, oh, okay, perfect, I'll just do micro, because I'll listen to, like, if this was me listening, I'd feel like, micro decisions, got it. And then I would just like micro decision myself to death while still never really going anywhere. So at some point, they're gonna have to make a decision. But you can start with those kind of small things when they are so overwhelming.
When you have the ability to make those things, and a lot of times if you're approaching a major life decision, there are smaller decisions that you can make to kind of get you into that space to be like, okay, I'm standing here with both my feet in the water, but it's time for me to go one way or the other. And I think sometimes the other part that compels people is they will find people sometimes always asking themselves, like, is there a better option than what I'm already thinking? And so when we find ourselves stuck in that space, it's difficult to move forward because you're looking at like what could be, should be, might be, and that's not necessarily dealing with the reality of what is in front of you. There's a lot of things that could happen, like, I could win the lotto if only I would buy a lotto ticket. But
I don't know. I try. Right?
I guess not. No, I'll have to make my fortune another way.
You're gonna call me on the way back. Like, listen, I got 50 lotto tickets.
Sometimes, and this is a paradox that I find a lot of people find themselves in, is that when you're confronted with difficult choices, the end result is often that we choose to do nothing at all. And people will stay still, they'll stand idle because they're afraid to move one direction or the other. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but one of the things that I always will kind of illustrate to people is that the cost of indecision sometimes can be catastrophic. It can be catastrophic because sometimes those opportunities are time oriented or space limited, or the resources that are there for them are only for the here and now. And so you have to be able to take advantage of that in those spaces. And so I think sometimes people get so scared and so horrified for, again, a variety of reasons, whatever the situation is that's, kind of right there in front of them. And so they don't do anything. And they kind of just let everything, drift by. And what I'll see sometimes is people, they won't make a decision for themselves. And what it does is it forces those environmental factors to end up making the decision for them. Right? So the lack of resources ran out. The money was gone. The time wasn't there. Like if you're mulling over buying a house now, like you don't have time to mull. Like you have to go in with an offer, and you have to pull the trigger like that. This wasn't always the situation though. Like if you go back 2 years ago, you didn't have to make that. You could go in and negotiate, and there was days or a week or two would go by before you had an agreement.
Like 1 day cash offer.
And there's 40 offers that go along with it. So there's 40 other people who are more decisive. So that pressure kind of makes people be more decisive. But sometimes people will take that approach. They don't know what to do, so they stall. They get into that kind of paralyzed state. They don't know what to do. And so it's just kind of like, well, maybe if I do nothing, it'll work itself out. And it doesn't. All that happens is the opportunity goes away. Or whatever it is, and so I see that a lot.
I'd say, would you say that's the most common issue that you see with decisiveness? Is just kind of
with indecisiveness?
Yeah.
Yes, I see people allowing other factors to make the decision for them rather than them assert themselves and make the decision for themselves. Well, then they don't have to take responsibility for it.
Well,
that's the other part.
Yeah,
is they don't have to own the consequences that came with that decision.
And then you can blame it, whatever happened.
Yeah. It was life, it was chance, it was God, it was divine intervention, it was whatever the person's holding on to in that moment. I'm not going to change or challenge that belief. Like, everybody uses that phrase, like everything happens for a reason. Well, you'll find the reason and you'll own it, and that'll be your truth. And that's life. And so that's okay. It's not up to me to change your truth. It's just if you're coming to me saying, I'm struggling to make this decision, how do I make it? And we're moving in that direction and you're not doing any of those things. Well, it's pretty clear to me what you're afraid, and that fear is causing you to not do something, and you're just going to allow other factors to make that choice for you.
Would you say that you see that more than like impulsiveness? Obviously that's like the total opposite of people who don't really think through decisions, and they're not paralyzed by fear. They just do things and then they're like, oh fuck, maybe that wasn't the right thing.
In teens, yes. Teens and kids, I'd say, yeah, they're more impulsive. Adults can definitely be impulsive.
Yeah, of course, personality is going to play.
I think, like, once you cross the threshold of 25, 26, and you're more in your career and you have actual responsibilities, like rent, a car payment, student loans, like, the impulsivity goes away a little bit because you're like, you have a lot of shit to be responsible for. So you will be impulsive, you know, it might be a Friday night, you're going to go out and get wasted or, you know, eat 5 cheeseburgers or whatever, but
wow.
people will be impulsive, but by and large it decreases unless it's like the result, like they might be using the impulsivity as a way to sublimate something else, you know, or distract their feelings or avoid dealing with something. But yeah, I mean, by and large, I think in adults, the difficulty becomes like the responsibility component, and they don't want to be responsible or own the consequences of the wrong decision. When I'm always trying to tell people it's not about right or wrong, it's about what is best for you and helping you become a whole or a complete person. And I think if you were to look at decisions, right, in almost every area of our life, like you can look at it from a political or an environmental or a personal health, and we were to say, look, let's take away all of our bias, all of our moral compass, and just say, look, what is best for this particular system? Our decision-making process becomes vastly different than it does when we start adding things like right and wrong and ethics and morals and all that kind of stuff. Not to say that you shouldn't include those things, but the idea of sometimes is challenging that perspective, because I think where a lot of clients start to feel conflict is when their belief systems runs contradictory to how they're behaving, or their behavior somehow runs in conflict with this now, and so they're like, now I don't know what to do. Well, now they're really stuck, because like on one hand they're saying this is something that really feels good and this is what I want to do, but these other like preconceived concepts are really holding them back. And so it's like, all right, are these preconceived concepts necessary for this decision, you know, or are they excuses or reasons to do it? And so that's kind of the exploration process that I try and go through with people. Let's see here. Obviously, when people allow the environment to make the decisions for themselves, it relieves the burden of them, but it also gives control over to everybody else in their life. And I'm sure for some of your clients, some of the people that you feel or that you deal with, I'm curious from a coaching perspective, how many times people come up to you and they're like, just tell me what to do, tell me what to eat, what to drink, what to think, and I'll do it.
I cannot tell you. I would say that if I had a service for that, we would be done. I would be retired. I'd be a multi-billionaire. Thankfully, the people who do end up working with us, generally speaking, because they've listened to the podcast or they talk to us, like they have an idea of kind of what we're about. But I would say that just like human nature, we want the fastest, easiest, most convenient way. So when you're somebody who's stuck or doesn't know what to do or is filled with information, there's so much going on, I have so much in my life, there's so much information, just tell me exactly what to do, it'll make it easier. And then we go, no, that makes it easier in the short term, but now we're not teaching you anything for the long term. And obviously our entire business is based off of education and like long-term success, and not just doing things in a 3-month period and then saying go fuck yourself. Like that is what everybody else in the industry does. We're trying to avoid that. So by having somebody tell you exactly what to do and what not to do, you are taking away any kind of ownership that you have over it, and you're really now kind of letting yourself off the hook in a way, because say you can't for whatever reason. So say you came to me and I was like, here's exactly what to do, and then you couldn't do it, and then you're like, well, yeah, Laurin doesn't get it. Like there was something came up, like I wasn't able to execute the plan, like it's fine, it'll just be a day. But instead, like, why wouldn't we actually teach you how to navigate those situations? Because that is what is going to come up and what's going to throw people off plan. Now, obviously, there is something to be said about certain times it can be overwhelming for people, right? And especially when they're first starting, they're very new. I'm not just going to throw everything at them like, let's have this really critical thinking, like, discussion. Like, no. Hey, here are some things that would be good to implement and some things to take away. Easy stuff. Then they obviously develop the competence, they build some good habits, and then we can eventually get to that place. So it's not like we never tell people what to do, and it's just kind of like they're swimming in uncertainty. We certainly are directive with people, but it's never like a here's an absolute yes, no, do this, do that. And it's, when you said the words like good and bad, like I actively try to not say those words or type those words ever, just out of the principle of like, I don't want that getting ingrained for anything. You know what I mean? First of all, I don't want my morality to be involved here because it's not relevant. But then I don't want it to involve theirs either, especially when we're talking about food. Like food is not a moral issue, you know what I mean? But people turn it into one by using those words. And after doing my grad school research, I realized how important that was and how, okay, I can actively not do that as a coach and like try not to say those words. And I think I said it earlier, and I was like, shit, like let me rewind that. But trying not to say those things as much as possible is really important too. So it gives people more of that background, and then they're able to say, okay, well, it wasn't black or white today. It was more of like this intermediary gray color, but I still moved forward and I didn't go 10 steps backwards.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and I guess sometimes some of the easy go-to answers or solutions for helping people become a little bit more decisive is, first and foremost, number one, narrow down your decisions if you can. If you're looking at like 50 different things, narrow it down to the top 5, to the top 10, whatever it is that you have to choose from. So by narrowing your decisions, it will eliminate all the other extraneous variables that don't really matter. It'll just kind of help you focus in on what your priorities are. Number 2, and I think you kind of alluded this before, and we all do this, like this is the reason you have a business, is people need coaches. They need authority figures in their life. But authority figures aren't supposed to be the ones that are going to make the decisions for you. The idea of it is look, I'm going to give you education, I'm going to give you these tools, I'm going to give you these things, but you're the person who's going to build the house. You're the person who still is responsible for ultimately making the decision. And, you know, like I can even use, you know, I've had clients and people will come to me and they're like, look, my sister is in an abusive relationship with her husband and he's beating the crap out of her every day and they have a little 2-year-old. Like, shouldn't she leave? Like, I don't know why she's staying. And I'm like, I don't know if she should leave. And I know that that's going to shock some people right away, right? So imagine this woman is now my client, and she's like, what do I do? And I say, first thing you should do is leave this guy. Like, get out immediately right now. So then the next day she calls me up and she says, look, I left him, but I have no money, no resources, no house, no friends, no support network. Now what do? I made the decision for her, now I have to own these consequences that come with it. Nothing is ever black and white. Now, is staying the right thing for her? Probably not. But there's a strategy and a plan that has to be put in place for this particular person. And there are, you know, a lot of emergency kind of things in situations like that. But the point that I'm trying to make with it is that you don't know the ripple effect that that decision is going to have in their life. So don't allow other people to make it, even if they're authorities. And I would also encourage people to find authorities that are related to the topic that you're dealing with, right? Like if you're struggling to make the right decisions financially, don't go to the guy at the gym and ask him what he's going to do with money. Like, that doesn't make any sense. People, you know, like at jiu-jitsu school, people will ask me a lot of crazy questions that don't have anything to do with mental health. And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I'm not a stockbroker. I'm not a finance guy. Like, I know what I do and I can give you that information if you want, but take it for what, you know, take it with a grain of salt. And do what you want, but you know, find an authority figure who's doesn't have to be an expert, but somebody who's at least knowledgeable in that area. And again, don't let them make the decision for you, but allow their influence to just be something that you explore within your own decision. The other thing that I really want to talk about is balance when it comes to decision making. Balance is a huge part of making the best decision for yourself. So number one, the more you know about a topic, the better off you are. However, you can know too much about a topic and it can still cause that kind of paralysis. So if you know nothing, it's time to start educating yourself and ramp yourself up to that space. But then you can get to a spot where you're like, you know so much where you're like, now I don't know what to do, because you can talk yourself in or out of it either way. That's too much. So there's a balance between knowing too much and too little. Okay, and this is where it's going to come when we start talking about like preparing and timing and how to deal with like regrettability of a decision. So again, have that balance in information, and obviously with enough time, there's perspective, right? So if it's a decision I made 10 years ago, I have a pretty good amount of perspective at this point to know whether or not that was the right or wrong decision. So what I would encourage you to do is I would encourage all of you guys to go back and look at the past decisions you've made in your life. This one that you're facing with today, or the 4 that you're dealing with today, are really tough, are really challenging, and they're going to forever alter your life. I get it. but you've made other big decisions in your life. So let's go back and talk about those. How did you make that decision? What did you feel before you made that decision? Is this a common theme for you? Are we picking up patterns or things that it's just like, all right, so this is worry, and you've thought about this, and you know everything that you really need to know. And everything that's going to happen after this is definitely going to be out of your control, right? Because there's a limit to what we can or can't control. So having that perspective is important, but allowing too much time to pass can be detrimental for all the reasons we talked about earlier.
And I would say it's so easy, especially too when we're all so busy, right? We're not just sitting around, oh, let me just think of all these big decisions in my life and like mull over the meaning of my life. And obviously too much idle time can be detrimental as well, right? So if you have nothing going on and all you're doing is thinking, you can think yourself into like a crazy pattern, right? And that's a whole different discussion. But most of us are really, really busy and we have a lot going on, but like things come out of nowhere, right? And whether they're these big decisions or small decisions, when we're busy, it's super easy just to like push them aside, or at least I know that's what I do. Like, oh, I'm busy, I'll do it later, and then it just grows and it grows and it grows. So whether it's taking just 30 minutes to yourself a week or every 2 weeks or whatever, like I don't know the perfect amount of time, but like actually sitting down, and whether you do it with a therapist or on your own, just reflecting, especially if you have something really big coming up. Where am I at with this? Like, what do I need to be doing? Like, how am I actually feeling? Because when all you have is time to think about it, that's all you're going to think about. And then when you're really, really busy and there's no time to think about it, it's the last thing on your plate. So you have to kind of bring that up. Not too much when that's like overwhelming, but you do need to sit kind of in with yourself and say, okay, where am I here? Like, I need to check in with this decision-making process. Like, can I pause it any longer? Do I need to make it? Like, do I need to backtrack? Like, where are we? And I know that a lot of people listening to this are going to be like, yeah, this all sounds great, but I'm really busy. Like, how do I do this? And it's literally as simple as taking just like a little bit of time to yourself. It could be mediated by a therapist, or it just could be like, hey, I'm going to a coffee shop today, or I'm waking up before everybody else in the house, and I'm going to sit for 30 minutes and just like, write.
Everybody can find 10 minutes in their day. I've never met any person who can. And so if you're telling me that you can't, you're lying to yourself and to me, which is bad.
Stop being a liar, you piece of shit.
Because you're looking for excuses to hold on to at that point as to why you can't do something, instead of finding the reasons why you can make something happen. And then so kind of some of the other things that kind of lead to balance are, how adaptable to change are you? People who are not adaptable to change, people who don't like change, they have a difficult time making new decisions. Makes sense. Okay, as Laurin exits the room for a coffee, people who have a difficult time with change are always going to struggle with making new decisions. Not always, but generally will, out of the fear that comes with it, because they don't know what they don't know. And that's what creates that level of or breeds on a level of uncertainty. And people like when things are predictable, when they're comfortable, when they know what to expect. So if you're not somebody who, is very adaptable or can roll with the punches, so to speak, then decision making can sometimes be a more difficult or laborious process for you. One of the other things I always ask people too is, how happy with past decisions are you? Like, let's sit back and explore some major decisions you made in your life, to go to school, to move, to buy the house, whatever it was, to reconnect with that person from your past. Like, what was it like? Like, how happy are you now with those decisions? And if you're satisfied with them, chances are you're already on the right path. Like, what works for you. You're just scared, and it's okay to be scared. It's just, what do we need to do to take the step forward to actually make the decision and move in that space? And then some of the other things that I'll try and look for is, in understanding decisions, there's two people. There's basically like two kinds of people when they make a decision. There are people who are satisfied with a decision, and it's kind of like, it was good enough. And then there are people who are like maximizers, who are kind of like, I am looking for the perfect solution. Where is it? It has to be here. And it doesn't exist, but they're looking for it. And so they're looking to like completely 100% optimize that decision. And it kind of falls into personality categories for individuals. Like, how many times have you been, it's like Friday or Saturday night, and you're looking for a movie to watch, and like, you've gone through Netflix, you've gone through Hulu, you've gone through Showtime at HBO, nothing. Between the 500 movies that are available on all those platforms, like, you still can't find a decision because the perfect one exists. Whereas somebody else can come in and be like, oh, look, there it is, boom, and just watch a movie. Like, that's kind of the difference between them. I'm curious which one you are, Laurin.
No idea. I didn't even know there was a name to my psychosis. Maximizer. It's amazing. Totally couldn't.
Well, at least with decision making.
At least with decision making, yeah. Okay, that's.
All right.
As far as movies go, though, I'm pretty like. It's really hard for me not to like a movie.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm not that hard to please when it comes to like entertainment. Like, especially in certain like I can pretty much laugh at any movie. So like if it's like a remote comedy, even if it's bad, I'll still be laughing. So I'm like, people are like, this movie sucked. I'm like, what? I was laughing at?
What was the best movie you watched lately?
Oh, I don't know.
Are you gonna start sweating again?
I was like, oh my god, what kind of a question is that? That's a question I don't like to answer. That is a serious question because if I don't give the right answer, I have to make the right decision.
Okay. Well, okay, I'll let you think about it. I'll let you think about. In 3
podcasts, I'll let you guys know what my favorite
movie you watched the other day.
No, but I've been telling everybody about this, so sorry if you've already heard. But probably my favorite show now that I've ever seen is called The Sinner. I told you about this. Mm-hmm. You probably didn't watch it, but seriously, you guys need to watch it. If you need a new show, it's amazing. The first season is like they're all like standalone, but the main detective is in all 3, but they're all 3 different stories. So it's like unique. Like they weave his story in with each story that he's on, which is really cool. And it's like a psych nerd fest. It's just amazing. So it's like crime, psych, trauma, thriller. You gotta watch it. So it's not a movie, but how about that?
TV series. It'll work. It'll work. Couple other things before we kind of wrap up, since we're getting down to the end of this one. When you start asking yourself certain questions, there are kind of go-tos where it's like, do I know enough? Is this the right time? What if the perfect answer still exists or the better option could be out there? When we're asking ourselves questions with this, what we're really talking about is you're struggling with the uncertainty of the decision and what is going to happen. And again, uncertainty is a normal, typical byproduct of any major decision that you're going to make, especially when you don't know. I mean, there might be certain things like moving from company A to company B, but if you're doing the same role, sure, there's going to be some differences, but by and large, the job isn't going to change. So it seems like a safer decision. Do I know enough? Is this the right time? These are kind of questions that we have to look at and evaluate within yourself. Like, do you know enough? There's going to be a limit to what information you know sometimes. Like before you date a person, before you move, you're never going to know until you've been there. Like, no, maybe you do know enough. Like if you've been traveling to Boston, 3 times a year for the last 10 years, I think you know Boston. Like you probably know enough. The question is it the right time? Do you want to live there? That kind of stuff. So some skills to use. I've been kind of filtering in the skills along the way. Number 1 is prepare yourself. If you don't know anything about a particular topic, move, situation, whatever it is, start to inform yourself. Talk to people, read, research, go on the internet. Be careful with what you read on the internet.
I'm like, that was terrible advice.
Start to educate yourself.
Unless you're looking at our website, don't go on the internet. That's the only site that matters. That's actually something that we do with pretty much every client with whatever decision it is, right? And in the context of like what we're doing with clients. If somebody's saying, oh, I might want to do a show, or I might want to do some kind of a competition, or I might want to get ready for this, or I might want to, whatever X goal is that they're trying to set. It's like, all right, well, this is new clients and current clients. Like, let's go through all of the options. Here's the situations. Here's what you can expect. Here's what's good about it. Here's what can be good about it. Here are some of maybe the possible negatives, especially when we're talking about competing, right? People just, let me just casually do this. And I'm like, you can casually do it, but are you going to be happy with that? Like, there's also a difference. Do you want to be competitive or just compete? And, what's going to happen with like time commitments and how are you going to handle afterwards? A lot of people are only thinking of that during period and not after or even before. So it's often just about laying out like all of the information. Like we always say, like we want everybody just to be really informed about the decision that they're making. Yeah. And that's like what you said, like you can't make a decision for somebody. I can't make a decision for our clients. Like, no, I can present you with all the information, some of the pros and cons, some of what I've seen as a coach, where you are in your current journey, but then ultimately you have to make that decision. And obviously at some point there are certain things as a coach that I say, no, like we're not doing this. You're not in a position to do this. If you want to go do that, you're going to have to go work with somebody else.
Right.
It's rare because when you present it in a logical way that says, okay, here's all of the reasons why and why not, generally clients are going to understand where you're coming from. It's not like me just being like, no, you shouldn't do this, and not explaining it. But sometimes people are, and it's like, I won't feel comfortable with that. So there's very few times that happens, but it has. So I think it's just important, if you are a coach or you are a therapist or you're anybody who's just listening, like, you need to be informed of all of the sides of it.
Yeah.
The great stuff, the glamorous stuff, which is really easily accessible, but then also maybe some of the darker sides of it, or just the realities of what you're going to be getting into.
Yeah, absolutely. Because being able to understand immediate consequences versus long-term consequences can help make a decision. One of the other things that I do want to kind of give you a kind of tool, I wish we had an ability to show it to you. There's kind of a chart. It's like a 4-square chart that I'll work through with some of my clients when we're talking about specific behaviors or even decisions. It works better with behaviors, but with decisions it works the same way. So what I'll do is I'll kind of create an axis, right? So on the vertical axis, I'll put up on the top, it'll say change. On the bottom, it'll say no change. And so on the vertical axis across the top, I'll put pro and I'll put con. So I'm sorry, horizontal, what did I say? Vertical and then horizontal, sorry. Okay, either way, it doesn't matter.
Lines. This isn't working out.
Pro, con, change or no change. And then what you start to do is, it's very similar to what most people will do, like a good or bad kind of a list. But what it does is it's like, okay, what are the benefits of me making this change now? What are the benefits of me not changing? And then you kind of flip it. So there's no change. So what are the benefits of me not changing now? What are the benefits of me changing now? And doing that. So sometimes it kind of works itself out, and it kind of lends itself to what you're thinking and what you're feeling. Obviously, asking for help can be empowering. So ask for help, reach out to people, help. Let your support network come involved in this. The more people sometimes that you have, it can be too convoluted. So narrow that to a few people whose opinions that you really trust and respect, who aren't going to make the decision for you, but will just help you look at the subject matter from all angles.
I can't tell you how many people have you've said it a few times in different podcasts about how a therapist should make a decision for you, or like tell you like overtly like what to do and not do. And there's so many people who have reached out and are like, wow, like that was so eye-opening. Like I didn't realize that my therapist was doing that, and like I realize now like that maybe some
I had somebody send me a question, and I'll address it just at the end of this. Maybe I should do it right now, but somebody did ask me a similar question. They were like, I don't know if my therapist is doing this to me, like, and so I took the time to kind of respond. So let me give you an example of when I would make a decision, not a decision, but I'll take a stance in like a session. So I had a wife who was coming to see me because her husband was struggling with drinking, and he has now gotten into recovery, and he's working that process, but she's struggling with the idea that she's like, I feel like I should still have the right to drink. She's like, I don't have the problem with it, but he does. And so what I said to her was, I was like, look, if you want your husband who's struggling with this, there might come a time, sometime in your life, where you can have alcohol in the house and he's not going to be triggered to go after it. But I was like, right now, that's not helping him. So I'm taking a pretty hard line. You should not be drinking alcohol in the house in front of your husband while he's in the middle of recovery. Like, if you want to help him, like, is it possible for you to do it? Sure, anything is possible, but it's not going to help him. So that's a situation where I was like very direct, and I was like, and we have some banter back and forth about that, but I'm like, there's nothing that's going to change in that. This is what's best for him and for you guys. The decision for you to drink is what's best for you, not for him and not for us. So remember, as a relationship, we're focusing on us, not just me as an individual. And so getting people to understand that versus like, should I leave my husband? I'm not going to make that decision for you. You have to choose to say or go. Like, we can explore both. So there's a difference between me making a decision versus me saying like, nope, I'm going to take a pretty hard stance here and say like, no, you really shouldn't be drinking while your husband's in recovery. So that's kind of an example of what me saying no or yes or holding a boundary would look like versus making a decision. I hope that clarifies for some people who might be struggling with that. But
I think it does. If
your therapist is certainly coming in and being like, you should leave, I can get you this, do that, do this, like, walk out the door. Don't even pay for the session. Just walk out the door. A couple of other little things to kind of bring you full circle before we leave here. Just because it's a complicated problem doesn't mean the answer has to be complicated either. Don't overcomplicate things. We tend to do this. We tend to look at so many different variables, we can't make a decision. Sometimes complex problems don't have complex solutions. Just make a decision. And more information, more time, more calculation is not always the best scenario. Like, you can just keep running that down the rabbit hole and it never ends. One last thing I will tell you guys to do is identify your values. Allow your decision making to reflect your value system and not just what's good or bad, right or wrong. Put your values in this decision. Like, if I were to ask you, is this in alignment with who you are, who you want to be, where you're going? If it is, now we have a much more clear path, and sometimes that can kind of clear the gutters of all the other crap that was slowing us down. So allow your values to be a part of that decision. Don't always take more time. Don't always calculate everything to the umpteenth degree and focus on every single conceivable detail, because you're just going to overwhelm yourself. And sometimes complex problems don't have complex solutions. So allow yourself a chance to breathe and step back.
All right, I think that was the perfect place to end. So if you guys are interested in reaching out to Rick, I will put his email below in the show notes. And for anything else, you can check out teamlocofit.com, and we will talk to you guys on Wednesday.